Welcome back to MyFinJourney. In today's episode, we're joined by Dilnaz, president of the WF Fund, a leader in philanthropy and community building with decades of experience in strategic giving, interfaith engagement, and uplifting marginalized communities. Dilnaz is also known for pushing a more community-led model of philanthropy. Things like participatory grant making, giving circles, and shifting decision-making power closer to the people doing the work. And for the MyFinJourney episode, this episode is more than just about wealth. It's about accumulation and, more importantly, allocation. How you give, what you fund, and what story reinforces your capital strategy, and ultimately the legacy you're building. Dilnaz, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Mustafa.
No, it's our pleasure. I wanted to start by really diving deeper and really understanding your background. I'd really love to hear how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I actually was born in Hyderabad, India, and I came to Chicago when I was 2 years old with my mom and my sister. And it was actually kind of a cold November day, and my mom left India for the first time, was on an airplane for the first time. She's wearing a sari and a sweater, and if anyone knows Chicago in November, it's a little bit chilly. And she's got these two daughters with her, and she came here because my dad had already come here a few months earlier, and they're going to be reunited and build a community and a home in Chicago. My mom and dad were kind of clueless. They were the working poor. They had hourly job positions. And then they had these two daughters, really rambunctious daughters. And my sister and I, we went through the Chicago public school system. We were bullied regularly. We were told that we were less than. And I think growing up, I was definitely one of those people that actually listened to people and said, wow, I am less than. Wow, I'm not the color everyone else is. And I don't know why I've got this darker skin color. I listened to those around us, and I think my sister pushed back and was like, nope, you're not going to make me feel less than. And she was like definitely the trailblazer. So there was like these two daughters that my parents had, and we were both very different personalities. But something I do remember, Mustafa, is the love and attention that I had at home. I really felt comfortable. There was this like a dual life that I lived. I lived this different life when I was at school where someone else, even my teachers, didn't understand like why I didn't celebrate Christmas or why I wasn't celebrating Easter. But then I got to come home and be with really loving parents, and we sat and watched Bollywood movies, and we ate dal and khichdi and keema with our hands. And yeah, so we had that type of upbringing when I was younger. And then I went on and got my degree in elementary education, my master's in elementary education. I was in education probably for a good 25 years. And then in my fees, that's when the wealth transfer occurred. And my father-in-law passed away, and I took over the philanthropic arm of our family giving. And I went ahead and I got a certificate at Lilly School of Philanthropy on philanthropy and how to understand strategic philanthropy. I had a goal of getting a master's. I didn't complete my master's, but I'm kind of close. Hopefully one of these days I will finish those master's classes. And then now I run our family fund, and we really focus on strategic philanthropy. We focus on making sure that the community gets a say. We make sure that we understand trust-based philanthropy and what are the 6 principles of making sure that philanthropy is done in a manner that has humility and not as much of a power dynamic.
I love that, Dilnaz. And I feel like there's so many places, we can take this episode. I want to start by maybe focusing on your background, if that's okay. Roughly when did you move to the US, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so I'm actually 55 years old. So we moved from Hyderabad, India to Chicago in 1972. I was 2 years old. And I never left Chicago. I find Chicago my backyard.
I love it. I love it. And do you feel like there were a lot of people moving from like India, Pakistan, maybe a lot of immigrants coming into Chicago at that point in time?
Yes, definitely. We had a really strong community. We hung out at our mosque. We regularly, were part of the Sunday school. So there were a lot of immigrants that were trying to build that community that they left, their parents and their chai shops and all their memories, right? And trying to rebuild it here in Chicago as well. So yes, I do understand the immigrant story, and I understand how really we created a stronger America because our parents gave up so much.
I love that. And how does that, you touched on your sister. It was nice that you mentioned her background. It reminded me of my daughters. Help me understand, was your sister younger than you, older?
Yeah, so my sisters were Irish twins. My sister's just 1 year, 2 months older than me. And we were, definitely always together. We were always in trouble together. It was just the two of us.
Okay. And for you, how do you feel like your background informs your view of giving and of grant making and of philanthropy in general?
So I think a lot of times what happens is people fall into philanthropy. They don't realize that you actually could get a certificate, an undergrad, a master's, a PhD, and get these amazing, nuggets of information. And I didn't realize that, right? So I also didn't realize philanthropy was what you and I probably did growing up at the kitchen table. So my mom and dad constantly talked about, oh, you know what? We have $100 saved up. Let's send it to India because an aunt needs a sewing machine. Or my mom and dad found out like an uncle was having open heart surgery and my parents saved up, like $150 to send back to India. That's philanthropy. So philanthropy is the love of humankind. And it isn't all about writing big checks and, saving the world like you often hear about philanthropy. And growing up, I also realized, I think in Chicago, you thought philanthropy or a philanthropist was a very affluent white male. And unfortunately, he did a lot of evil to the city. And I remember it was 2018. Someone said to me, Dilnaz, why don't you just call yourself a philanthropist? And I was like, what? I'm nothing like a philanthropist. So I had to reclaim that name, that term, that title, and own it. So now I don't say I'm a philanthropist. I say I'm a philanthropic advocate, and I walk in community with the 50-some nonprofits that we support nationally.
That's so powerful, Dilnaz, because respectfully, it also highlights what you started out by saying. Like that society kind of pushes a narrative, like why do I have dark skin, in a negative kind of connotation. And it feels like that also bleeds through what a philanthropist means. And so then more like how you're going to kind of define and project yourself as a philanthropic advocate rather than just a philanthropist, because maybe that word doesn't feel clean enough. That word doesn't feel indicative enough of the amazing work that you're doing. So Dilnaz, if you and I were to like run into each other in an elevator and you had like the random urge to just share one charity that you're working with, what charity would that be and what would that story sound like?
I hope it's a long elevator ride and we may even stop. We might
Please,
even get stuck in the elevator.
It might be 5 elevator rides, however you want to answer the question.
Wonderful. So I think about the WF Fund as a catalytic funder. We are catalytic funders, and what we mean is we come to the table, but we like to bring others to the table as well. And when we come to the table, we aren't able to fund large amounts as certain large funders are that you hear in philanthropy, but we are able to make sure that we are connectors. So if there's a great organization like Connections for the Homeless located right here in Chicago that really supports veterans and domestic violence survivors, what we do is we say, hey, we will be there and we'll support you with some capital campaign, but there's 5 other philanthropists or 5 other individuals that we feel like would like to support this as well. So what we do is we come to the table, we bring other philanthropists and other philanthropies at the table, and we try and make a shift. We try and make a movement so we can start working on these nonprofits to really become better equipped to do their work. So you asked me for one nonprofit that we support, and I can't really say one that we support, but I can actually tell you a little bit about the buckets of giving. So we have 3 buckets of giving at the WF Fund. One is human services, which is supporting nonprofits that really just give out food and help unhoused individuals. And one of our favorite organizations is Connections for the Homeless, located right here in Chicago. But another one that we really like in Chicago as well is ShyCare does a great job where they have a bus and they have a medical bus, and we as a family can go and do these activities on weekends and support the homeless community as well. Another bucket of giving we have is civic engagement. So in civic engagement, it's really us understanding how important museums are, how important it is for us to get the vote out, how important it is for us to educate what our community is doing. So some organizations in civic engagement are RISE. RISE is an organization located in Minneapolis that supports sisterhood of women and making sure that women are getting the vote out and understand how important the voting opportunity is. Another organization that we appreciate in our civic engagement bucket is Adler Planetarium, a museum right here in Chicago, making sure we understand museums and the power of museums, especially for young adults, making sure that they have these dreams that they can look up in the sky and go, wow, I want to be an astronaut one day. So it's important to be civically engaged. And our last bucket of giving is religious pluralism. With religious pluralism, we really want to make sure that all faith traditions are working together and we're allies in this work. So I'm actually a trustee at the Catholic Theological Union right here in Chicago. And the reason we fund Catholic Theological Union is because Catholics and Muslims need to work together. We're the largest largest population. We are not new to understanding faith, but how do we do this work together all over the world? Another organization in the religious pluralism bucket is Association of Muslim Chaplains. Chaplains have really been having a hard time, especially during the genocide for the last 2.5 years, but the encampments, higher ed institutions, what they're going through. So making sure that chaplains have opportunities to really understand their power and what they're doing on campuses.
So Dilnaz, it feels like you're doing a lot. And I'm sure there's many things that you're doing that you haven't even elaborated on yet. But when you started this answer, it felt like the first thing that you mentioned is that we're a charity that helps get other charities involved. We do philanthropic work and support charities, and we bring in other partners that are also gonna donate and support the mission. And correct me if I understood incorrectly, but Dilnaz, is that normal for a lot of, advocates in your space? Is that typically how they work or not really?
I don't know if it's normal. I just know that's the way we do it. I also know it's the way, there's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And the whole point is we want to go far. We really want to create a better America for all of us so everyone can thrive. And the only way we can do that is by all of us working together. All faith traditions, all races, all cultures, and that's why we think it's really important to constantly collaborate and really work with other people that are connectors.
I love that. I guess the flip side is you have that other saying, like, too many cooks in the kitchen spoils the broth. Do you ever feel like working with so many different groups, maybe there's like a difference in like agenda or goal? Or is it, share your perspective on that. Is it that you guys are able to kind of really hone in on one issue, one core cause, and say, hey, for this core cause, we have 5 groups that are going to be able to work together to drive, change? Or is it more of the situation where you get into the weeds of it and maybe the cracks start to appear?
Yeah, so we have 2 arms. One is the grant-making arm, and the second arm is the narrative change arm. So I think I can expand on this a little bit with the narrative change arm. So what we do with the narrative change arm is tell a different story about the Muslim American community. And again, as catalytic funders, we bring other people to the table. We want to make sure that community foundations. So as we are in Minnesota right now telling the generosity story in Minnesota, and Minnesota is a beautiful state, and it's been going through a very difficult time since December of 2025. How do we tell the neighborly story of Minnesota? So we get community foundations together, right? Asking community foundations to make sure that they understand the community that they're having difficulty with. So we sit at tables with community foundations and understand, okay, so have you really talked to, we talk about the Black and Brown community. When we think about the Black and Brown community, that also means the Muslim American community. Have you made relationships with the Muslim American community? If you haven't, how do we build that relationship? So sometimes, I will tell you, Mustafa, it's a couple of years we work with a certain organization and they're just kind of stubborn and saying, nope, we're not interested. And then you just say, okay, thanks so much for these years of learning, and then you go on to the next organization to work with. But it does humble you at times when after like a good 3 to 4 years someone's still not interested in investing in the work that you're interested in investing in. But it's also important to cut those ties and say, hey, I am not interested in just being with people that are going to tokenize me. I am interested in people that want to be in that investment as much as I want to invest in.
And I really appreciate that, Dilnaz. I want you to dive a little deeper, if you don't mind, right? Because some people, after you've invested 4 or 5 years, it's very difficult to say like, hey, why don't they just get it, hypothetically? I'd really love to understand your approach, your mentality, what you think when you're concluding that this might be a relationship that we have to cut.
Yeah, nothing should be personal. Everything is, either a business or it's professional or it's for a purpose. And I think that's why I get up in the morning and I have a great purpose to do this work. I go to sleep at night and I think, okay, what did I do well today and how can I make it better tomorrow? So there's a lot of self-reflection. And if you don't have that self-reflection in the morning and in the evening, it's hard to do well the next day. So I think it's important to realize if someone says no to you, it's professional. They said no for a certain reason. We didn't fit into their mission. If someone says yes to you, it's not because we're the best at it. We are just there and we have this opportunity, and how do we walk through this door with humility and make sure we do the best we can. So I think it's important to constantly realize that this is a really important and heavy work, and you do this work not just for yourself, but for the betterment of the community, and how's the community benefiting from this?
Thank you, Dilnaz, for sharing that. Circling back to maybe the humble upbringing, the mentality that you mentioned of like doing this work humbly, the mentality that you're mentioning that nothing's really personal. It's just, professional and everyone's trying to drive growth that aligns with their goals. When you think about maybe your parents, do you ever think that they thought you'd be in the position you are today where you're creating grants, thinking about, advocacy, things that maybe immigrants weren't thinking about when they were immigrating from their countries?
I love that question, especially because my mom actually just passed away about 3.5 weeks ago, so it's really raw.
Sorry to
Yeah,
hear.
and she was a lovely person, and I think my parents just did philanthropy very differently, right? It was just every single year they would sit at the kitchen table and they would think about where to give, how to give, and still my parents, my dad till this day, will give to India because he says there's no poverty like the poverty in India, and he really wants to help his relatives and old neighbors in India. So no, I think my parents don't understand really what we're doing and how we do 3-year gift agreements and how, there's an agenda and there's strategy behind it and there's impact reports. So nope, I don't think my parents ever would have imagined this, nor do they understand it. But I feel like it's okay because they do philanthropy their way and they're really comfortable with. And I do think everyone needs to give back, but give back in the way that you're comfortable with. And for me, when the wealth transfer occurred, like in 2015, 2016, I think about I didn't see a lot of women, black and brown women like me. I had to do a lot of homework. I had to do a lot of research about, black philanthropy and understanding religious philanthropy. And I came back to realizing even in my own home, I really did not get taught about Muslim philanthropy. And the Muslim philanthropy that was done through Khadija, who was the Prophet's wife, and how she did philanthropy 1,400 years ago is my role model. And Khadija used to be the community builder, the businesswoman, the philanthropist in the country, in the areas of Mecca and Medina. And the more I learned about how she did philanthropy, I was like, wow, I don't need to keep looking for others to help me better understand philanthropy. I just need to better understand my faith. I need to better understand my own culture that I come from. So it was interesting. I feel like women, because we are often told we are less than, and the financial literacy is not there for women growing up, that it was a bit of hard work for me to understand and the financial literacy and to get comfortable with financial literacy and be in rooms where, certain language was used. So I think I needed to do my homework as well.
I think that's a very powerful answer. And the only problem is it gets me a little excited when you transition to, financial literacy. I don't want to go there just yet. I really want to zoom in a little bit more on, because you mentioned a great example of Khadija. You mentioned it 1,400 years ago. You mentioned it alluding to a society that was probably very, I don't know the right word. I'm just going to use like male dominated. Maybe chauvinistic is the right word. I don't know. Patriarchal, I think is probably the right word. A more patriarchal society based on my limited understanding. So I'd really want you to maybe dive in deeper, living in 2026, living in a society where you're saying, hey, in theory, society is not really that literate financially, and maybe women are even less financially literate. But going back 1,400 years, you're able to find a better example from a society that was probably more patriarchal than today's society. So I'd really love to understand your journey to get to a point to realize that this is the right role model to emulate, if that makes sense.
So I think it goes back to, again, what stories do you hear and what stories do you accept as your stories, and when do you push back, right? So it's the narrative change work. So the number one misconception about the Muslim community are Muslim women and how Muslim women have no voice and they have no say and they have no rights. But then again, that's the narrative that someone wanted to push in the U.S., and that's what we heard in the movies we watched, in the media that we were absorbing. But I want to push back and say, you know what? It's what I want to learn. And when I learn fully, I understand the challenges of patriarchy. I understand the challenges of, how money gets to tell certain stories. And I had to do my homework. So again, I think it's up to each individual where they want to go, because we could sit and go, oh, poor Muslim women, how sad that is.
I love that, Dilnaz. Now I want to transition, if that's okay, to really understand how all of this informs your view on financial literacy. Because sometimes there's an idea that to uplift a family or to uplift a community, you need to invest in the mothers. You need to kind of uplift them. But you also alluded to the idea that sometimes financial literacy in female circles is really lacking, and how, money kind of determines what projects we prioritize. So I'm curious to kind of hear your thoughts, maybe hear WF's thoughts in terms of their grant making and how they address or think about these types of challenges at a family level, and then ultimately like at a community
Yeah.
level.
So philanthropy should never be for creating a stronger family. That's not the reason we have philanthropy. Honestly, we have philanthropy to create a better community. For Muslims, it's actually it's one of our pillars of Islam, and we do it because God mandates that we do it. So it's important to understand that philanthropy is done to please God. But then living in the U.S., philanthropy is also done for tax purposes as well, right? Let's be honest. A lot of us open donor advised funds or different avenues of giving to minimize our tax giving. So there's that form of philanthropy as well. But I think it's also important to realize as you're doing philanthropy, you can do it in a manner that uplifts the nonprofits, because a lot of nonprofits are working with a limited amount of resources, a limited amount of staffing, a limited amount of time, limited amount of funding, and it's not their funds, it's someone else's funds, so they have to report back. And there's just so much to the power dynamic between the funder and the fundee, or the grantor and the grantee, and that's a power dynamic that's hard to break. But what you can do is be respectful and have the nonprofit sit with you at a coffee shop, or some space where you have a discussion about, like, so you need funding for a new executive director, or you need funding for, to open this new project up. How much funding do you need? How long do you think it's going to take? And having those really honest, detailed conversations are usually what isn't had. What's usually had is, we need $50,000 and we need it right now, and this is how we're going to do it, and we really would love it from you, and you're the only one that can do it for us. And I mean, there's just like this, I don't know, it's just an unusual relationship sometimes that happens between grantors and grantees. But I think when you...
Those are the relationships I'm used to.
They're very uncomfortable. They're very uncomfortable.
Continue.
And then what happens is, things don't go exactly the way they're supposed to go. But how do you give people a second chance? How do you give people the opportunity to try again and make a mistake? And I understand money doesn't, grow on trees, so it's hard to do that. But nonprofits are really struggling, especially since COVID till now in 2026. Nonprofits have been working so hard to be able to do this work. It's really just making sure that you have honest, detailed conversations, and it's written in a grant and it's written in a contract where you say within 6 months this is going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, what are the opportunities to catch up on that, and just having that back and forth conversation.
That's beautiful, Dilnaz, because you touched on two things that I think are important. I mean, you touched on many things, but I'm going to highlight two. The first is maybe the average donor experience, which is like, hey, the sky is falling, I need this check, and I need it from you, and you're the only person who can help me. Personally, that's the narrative I'm used to. That's the narrative that doesn't necessarily feel comfortable, but it feels like that's how it's always been. And then there's the idea that no, things can be structured in a more streamlined manner, where you can work with somebody who will do the due diligence for you, who will make sure that these are the right projects in line with your goal. You want to feed people, okay. You want to house people, okay. You want to focus on education or literacy or voter engagement, whatever your mandate is. And we can build out an actual strategy to ensure that your dollar is most efficiently used. So I guess, Dilnaz, if I was a high value, like, potential donor, I came to WF Fund and I'm like, hey, why should I donate to WF Fund? Help me walk through that kind of conversation, if you don't mind, unless you guys don't accept outside, donations.
So first of all, we don't take solicitations. So even if you go on our website, we're not going to take solicitations. It's very much boots on the ground. We've got, team members finding new opportunities. We look for new opportunities. We do that. Second of all, we are a private LLC, so what we do is we don't accept donations to the WF Fund, but we do accept donations or, grants towards projects that we're doing. So what we do with, like, Inspire Generosity, we get funding through different community foundations, different individuals to fund Inspire Generosity. Also, like we had mentioned, we're catalytic funders. So if there's a great initiative that's happening, and I can give you an example of building out a chaplaincy program at Ohio State University or at Butler University, we will say, hey, we will plant the seed for this, but how would others like to be part of it as well? So the university is actually dealing with the entity and building that initiative, and we've just brought people to the university to have those deeper conversations. We're a really lean team. We're doing a lot of the boots on the ground work, but we're also really interested in doing coalition building, because without coalition building, we're not going to do this well.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, Dilnaz. And I guess maybe to make it more tangible, maybe for me, maybe for the listener, when you say planting the seed, for example, in like establishing a seat at a university, at a chaplaincy, my understanding is that can cost like $1 million, hypothetically, which can feel like a lot for a donor versus like you gave the example of your dad donating to India. I think that sales pitch, that, donation, that story makes a lot more sense, is more easy to grasp your head around versus like a chaplaincy where you have to kind of explain the long-term benefit of that and how you're changing hearts and minds maybe over a long period of time. So when you at WF Fund and when you think about like all the different charities that you can catalyze, mobilize to help, actually sprout, plant this seed and water it and help it sprout into like a very strong tree, how do you guys look at it from a capital allocation perspective? Is there a certain amount in the budget? Is it saying, hey, this thing costs X, so we're going to give 10%, 5%? How do you guys think about it, if you don't mind me asking?
I also think you brought up a great question, because we do have some push and pull with our own family board. We have 8 categories of this giving. When you think about zakat, which is similar to tidings, which is similar to sadaqah, we have 8 categories, right? So some family members would want to give really just to the poor and needy, and they feel that's what we should be doing, just giving to the poor and needy. Others, individuals might think, no, we actually want to, do this for changing hearts and minds, to win over a long strategic way of doing things, right? So there is that push and pull in our family. Again, as far as categories, we try and do like a third where it's really just giving to the needy. Like I'd mentioned, connections for the homeless, making sure we give directly to those opportunities. A third of our funding goes long term, where it's like civic engagement, where we're building a chaplaincy program that might show impact in the next 5 years. Third of it goes to a lot of gray areas where we might be giving for a professor that is teaching at an institution, an individual that is doing some work that does change in hearts and minds, but also at times is feeding the needy and the poor as well. So we do a third, but we do fund exclusively within the U.S. because we do think that is our backyard, and that's where we want to start making the changes. And a lot of times people go, well, gosh, you get more, bang for your buck if you really fund internationally, especially, and there's so many, really poor opportunities like in Sudan or in Gaza or in Somalia. And we do believe in supporting those organizations and those entities in foreign areas, but this is our backyard. If we can't get rid of homelessness and, change hearts and minds in the U.S., then how can we go outside and do that work as well?
I think you bring up a great point, Dilnaz, and I think it's worth reflecting on for myself and all of us as listeners. But I guess circling back, you had mentioned that the WF Fund doesn't necessarily take solicitations. It's really from your boots on the ground approach. If somebody's listening to this and they're that chaplain that's, let's say, like, they're that chaplain and they need extra funding, or they're looking to establish a chaplaincy at a different university, is there a process? Is it like going to the website? Is there a process for them to reach out to you or your team? Or is that something that just doesn't kind of fit the mandate and you'll find them?
Yeah.
What's the right way to look
again,
at it?
it goes back to what connections do we have, right? So a lot of times people will be like, here's a great organization, you really should look into it. So it's definitely, philanthropy is very relational. It's very much who you know, how you know that person, what type of relationship did you build with that person. So a lot of times when people go, oh, here's a great opportunity, you should look into it, then we do look into those opportunities. Second, if someone sends us an email, we'll try and respond to it. We'll try and look into it a little bit deeper. More than anything, we have a lot of feelers out. We know a lot of areas nationally that are doing really good work. So we kind of really find those organizations on our own.
No, that's very powerful. That's very powerful. For you personally, right? Do you mentor any people? Do you look at it like, hey, I came to this country, I'm very successful, I've scaled, and if somebody is looking to network with me, I'm more than happy to? Or is it more of a situation where right now obviously you're doing a lot? So, is it a situation where you're kind of very invested in WF and everything kind of goes through them, and maybe there's not the bandwidth for mentorship, for or that type
I
of
think
networking?
mentorship is very, very important. I don't think I had the mentorship that I wished I had, or someone to tell me, like, you're just enough, you should go and do something. It's really interesting. I think every person gets to their level of confidence when they needed it. I'm obviously a very late bloomer. I think I reached my level of confidence at the age of 45. So I'd say in the last 10 years, I've really felt comfortable. I've owned my voice. I've owned my ability to not do something well as do something well. And if I make a mistake, I'm willing to say, hey, I made a mistake. But I wish someone had said, hey, Dilnaz, we'd love to mentor you, when I was like 15, or if I was 25, or maybe I didn't seek that as well. I think it's a combination. Sometimes you need to seek it, and sometimes someone finds you out there. So I do take the opportunity. I do mentor quite a few young students at Lilly School of Philanthropy, and how they're doing their studies, and where do they see themselves as a philanthropist. I definitely like to mentor young refugee women that are part of an organization called Girl Forward that does really good work about making sure that we uplift refugee voices and individuals that came to the U.S. not because they wanted to come to the U.S., but because they were displaced, and because of their displacement from their previous country, how do we let them know this is their new home, and how do we support them? So mentorship is very important.
I love that, Dilnas. Thank you so much for shining a light on that. One question that kind of came up to me when you mentioned mentorship and growth was the idea of coming into your own voice. You mentioned it with respect to maybe your identity as let's call it a Muslim American. For you, do you feel like that idea of kind of coming into your voice and gaining clarity also exists in the realm of like personal finance?
Personal finance, yeah, I do. I feel like you see where there's an opening and an area where you can create a difference, and how do you invest in that difference? So yeah, I do think there's a lot of conversations that people have quietly about like where to invest and how to invest. And the fact that women and girls only get 3% of all the funding that's out there is really important to state. That how do we start funding more women and girl organizations? How do we fund more women and girl sports to make sure that they have the confidence to do the work that they're doing? So yeah, we see opportunities and we fund those opportunities. But I also think about, as a Muslim American woman, the anti-Muslim hate that we have out there nowadays and how prevalent it is. If we as an adults don't stand up to that anti-Muslim hate, it's really hard for the young boys and girls in elementary school and high school to have confidence to do that. So it is very important that we change legislation and advocacy to make sure that the laws are saying, nope, you can't do this. No, you cannot say this in school. Teachers can't say this. Adults can't say this. And there is a law against that. So it's really important that we advocate for justice for everyone.
Unpack that a little bit, Dilnas, if that's okay. Because I feel like as a son to immigrants, as a Muslim person in America, sometimes it feels like our culture and our religion is one of humility, where the idea of like standing up doesn't actually always mean physically standing up or verbally saying anything. It just means, hey, we're gonna stand up, put our head down, and just go to work and just be a hardworking, normal American. And we're not necessarily gonna broadcast that we're Muslim. We're not gonna necessarily broadcast our mandate of like equality for all, because it's so basic it should be obvious. I would really appreciate it maybe if you could unpack that mentality a little bit, help us reflect on those gaps just because of your policy and
I also
advocacy
think
work.
about fear. The word fear often comes into my mind. So a lot of times my parents, I remember when I was younger, I'd be like, Mom, I don't understand my math homework. I don't understand. She didn't explain it to me well. The teacher did a terrible job. And my mom always said, no, you didn't understand it. It's your fault. My mom never thought it was the teacher's fault, right? So growing up, just because my parents were fearful and they were so appreciative of having this opportunity to be in the U.S., my parents never really thought, maybe the teacher didn't do a good job. Maybe I should go in the morning and talk to the teacher, because we didn't have emails in the 1970s. Maybe I should go and talk to the teacher and ask her, can you re-explain that to her? Like, my daughter's really struggling with her homework. What can you and I do together to make it better for her? My parents always said the teacher was right, I was wrong, I need to be a better student. And I think that kind of landed with me for quite some years, where I wasn't standing up to authority. I wasn't able to, fight back for myself. And like I said, I was a late bloomer, and now it's like with the anti-blackness as well, right? So when you talk about the American Muslim community, as an American Muslim, I think about the anti-blackness in our country, but in our faith as well. How we need to understand how really we're immigrants, right? And the Black community has done this work for over 400 years to make sure that we have civil rights, to make sure that we're able to vote, to make sure that we're able to get livable wages. And we're not thankful to the Black community because all of a sudden the immigrant community came up and we were like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, work harder, be focused, exactly what you said earlier. And we kind of like just said goodbye to the Black community. So how do we understand our history, and how do we understand where our place is in history is very important.
I love that. That's so powerful. I want to link this to financial literacy, if that's okay. You mentioned that there's a couple different board members. You mentioned that they have a couple different maybe ideologies with respect to where to donate. You mentioned maybe how your dad donates, which is maybe more in line with how my dad donates. How do people think about financial literacy from your perspective? Do you feel like there is a decent gap? Or do you feel like it's something that people have a really good dial in terms of maybe the different types of people you interact with at the local grassroots level and then at the foundation type level?
I think, the discrepancy of funds is very prevalent. So a lot of times in philanthropy, like we think about, large funding, $100,000, $1 million, and those are really large numbers, right? And then the nonprofit is just trying to pay its small staff members. The nonprofit's trying to keep its lights on. So they can't think in those big numbers. But how do we all understand without nonprofits, we couldn't be doing the work that we do in the U.S. So in philanthropy, you need nonprofits, you need government, and you need philanthropy to create a stronger civic community. To have this civic community, philanthropy can't fix it all, but government, nonprofits, and philanthropy can fix it all. So it's really important when you think about financial literacy, how do we make sure the government is really understanding the importance of what's happening in the community that's doing the work? Because we know government grants are at the trillion level, but philanthropy grants are at the billion-dollar level. So philanthropy can never fix what we are working with government, and especially with legislation and advocacy.
And if your friend was running a charity, that nonprofit that was maybe struggling to keep the lights on, probably doesn't have any paid staff, etc., just trying to do good and, let's say, build a local mosque or something like that, right? US-based, etc. Is there an efficient roadmap from your perspective to get the type of funding that not necessarily the WF fund does, but a similar type of fund or government funding? Is there a pathway to say, hey, listen, you don't know what you don't know. I've been there, I've done that. This isn't my mandate, but here are the steps to follow to kind of efficiently get access to capital that is looking for you? Because I think sometimes we don't recognize that our problem is somebody else's solution. There is somebody looking out for that charity that you're alluding to, but it might not be you.
Yeah, but I also
does that
think,
kind of make sense?
Why does everyone always have to start a new organization or a nonprofit? So right now, the Council of Foundations says there's about 1.8 million nonprofits out there. 1.8 million nonprofits. Really, we need to start another one. Couldn't we collaborate with one of the nonprofits out there and say, hey, you know what? Can we tweak our missions just a little bit so I can support the work you're doing, and I can, also invest in the work you're doing? So I would say to someone that's new out there wanting to start a nonprofit, please don't start another nonprofit. Try and work with another nonprofit out there. It's like the same donors are giving to the same organization. So there aren't that many donors out there, but there are a lot of good ideas. So how do we make sure these ideas are collaborating? And I also think about giving circles. So we talked a little bit earlier about women and women in philanthropy. Giving circles are something that women do really well, where you get a group of women together. When I give $10 and Mustafa, you give $10, it doesn't make much of an impact. But when we give $20 together, it makes a better impact, right?
Why?
Because
help
first of all,
somebody
it's
understand
the
why.
thought partnership. It's Dilnaz and Mustafa working together, and we're thinking a problem together. Then we're giving twice as much money together. Then what we're doing is I have my network and Mustafa has his network. So then next year, hopefully I can bring two people and Mustafa can it's like this aggregated effect that occurs. And we want to understand it's always about scaling up if it's a good organization, and how do we scale up this way? Those are a great opportunity for everyone to do what they're doing and to do it better.
So if we hypothetically launched a giving circle on WhatsApp, what would that look like in your opinion? Who would we add? Where would we donate? And how
Yeah,
much would we
I
hit
think
people up for
listening
every time?
sessions are really important. So what we would do, Mustafa, is like, we'd first of all not WhatsApp because we know that's not a good secure space anymore. So hopefully Signal or somewhere else is a little bit better. But what we would do is like just listen. I think it's very important, number one, to listen and to hear what people are wanting to create, number one, and where they have made mistakes or had flaws or challenges, because we can do so much better when we learn from other people's mistakes. After we do that listening session, number two, what is our bandwidth? Everyone has a different bandwidth, right? So, like, let's say, hey, if Mustafa can give a certain amount, that's X for Mustafa, and Dilnaz has a different amount, that's X for Mustafa. So, making sure that we have different levels of giving is really important. And then, number three, making sure that everyone has a voice and they feel like they're valued in this giving circle is really important, because the reason giving circles have been around for thousands of years is because people feel valued. They feel like they have an investment in this. And I think that would be really important.
I love that. So for any charity who's listening, this is a great way to kind of connect with your donor base to maybe raise capital, raise charitable donations, but really understand like that feedback loop, to really be engaged with people, to understand why they're donating to your charity when they could have donated to like the other 1.8 million charities that Dilnaz mentioned that exist. Dilnaz, this has been a great conversation. Really enjoyed having you here. I hope you've enjoyed your time with me. More than anything, Dilnaz, this has been groundbreaking because it's been taking the idea of charity and the idea of donating, but really understanding the formal leadership, allocation, and strategy that goes on behind this. So if you're listening and you want your wealth to maybe have a larger impact, it might make sense to check out Dilnaz's website. We'll include the link below. Dilnaz, is there any other place where you'd want people to maybe connect with you, reach out if they wanted to learn more about what you guys are doing or learn more about how they can
Yeah,
maybe join
check
another
us out on
organization
LinkedIn. I'm
similar?
pretty prolific on LinkedIn. And also make sure that if you're in Minnesota, join us for the Inspire Generosity Showcase in Minnesota. But also, I think lastly, I would just say, I think we're all just enough. I think we have to stop, what is it, analysis by paralysis, and constantly thinking, am I thinking enough? Am I doing this enough? We're just enough, and we just need to act now. We need to be action oriented.
I love that. Speaking of action oriented, if this conversation has helped, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a review, and maybe most importantly, share this with someone else who you think it can add value for. That's another way of charity. That's another way of helping our communities all grow and scale efficiently. We'll talk
Thank
soon,
you.
guys. Have a good one. Bye.